All right, now everyone need to listen up. This little quick tutorial for World War One. I ain't been there this week. Won't be there this week. So if you take time to go over this, we can do a quick tutorial. So chapter 19 is World War One. Okay. Now this we're gonna start off on page 578, and we're going first thing we're looking at is the four causes of World War One. If you did your packet, which you received on Monday, there was the four causes should have been nationalism, imperialism, militarism, and alliance system. Those are your four causes of World War One. Now, nationalism is a term you should know by now. A devotion to the interests and cultures of one's nation. I've been speaking about this all semester. Next one, imperialism. We took up this term the week before spring break. This is when a nation, a stronger nation, uses means of military, political, and economic to overtake a weaker territory. Then you got militarism, another cause of World War One, where many nations throughout Europe, including the United States, were greatly building up their military. And the last cause of World War One was the alliance system, where many countries were getting in alliances with other countries. And when that country goes to war, you in alliance with them, that means you gotta go to war with them too. So the alliance system was another reason for the World War One. And from the alliance system, you had the Allies, who were considered to be France, Britain, and Russia. The Triple Alliance consisted of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. Now they became known as the Central Powers. No difference between Allies and Central Powers. Now, if you're on your book, page 581 gives you a map, and that map breaks down all the countries that are involved on the two sides, the Allies and the Central Powers. Now, your Central Powers are made up of Germany, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Now, your allies were made up of France, Italy, Great Britain, Ireland. You had Portugal and Russia. These were the allies. Then you had your countries that were neutral, such as Spain and Norway and Sweden. Now, what really got this kicked off will be the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. Now, with his assassination, it basically was a domino effect. One thing fell in place and everything else fell in behind it. So June 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austrian throne. He visited the Bosnian capital, Sarajevo. As the royal entourage drove through the city, Serbian nationalists stepped from the crowd and shot and killed the Archduke Ferdinand and his wife, Sophie. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared what was expected to be a short war against Serbia. The alliance system pulled one nation after another into the conflict, and on August 1st, Germany, obligated by treaty to support Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia. On August 3rd, Germany declared war on Russia's ally, France. Germany invaded Belgium. Britain declared war on Germany and Austria-Hungary. The Great War had now begun. Okay? So, the alliance system, militarism, imperialism, and nationalism will be some of the main causes for World War One. Now, we have not gotten involved just yet. So, next question is, why is the United States going to get involved in World War One? Now, if you turn to page 584, the war hits home for the United States. Now, one of the things that was going on at this time was a British blockade. And the British were very adamant by blocking any military equipment or anything they deemed to be military equipment or supplies into Germany. Now, in the process of doing that, they also began to block food from coming into Germany. And Germany didn't take too well to them blocking any food sources or like fertilizer. So, as fighting on land continued, Britain began to make more use of its naval strength. It blockaded the German coast to prevent weapons and other military supplies from getting through. However, the British expanded the definition of contraband to include food. They also extended the blockade to neutral ports and mined the entire North Sea. The result was twofold. First, American ships carrying goods for Germany refused to challenge the blockade and seldom reached their destination. Second, Germany found it increasingly difficult to import foodstuff and fertilizer for crops. By 1917, famine stalked the country. An estimated 750,000 Germans starved to death as a result of the British blockade. Americans had been angry at Britain's blockade, which threatened the freedom of the seas and prevented American goods from reaching German ports. However, Germany's response to the blockade soon outraged American public opinion. So the question is, what is Germany going to do in response to the British blockade, which was starving their people? So they go on something very similar, but they use submarines. Now, German U-boat response. And the German U-boat is something you would know as Americans as submarines. Germany responded to the British blockade with a counter blockade by U-boat, the German word for submarine. Any British or Allied ship found in the waters around Britain will be sunk. And it would not always be possible to warn crews and passengers of the attack. One of the worst disasters occurred on May 7th, 1915, when a U-boat sank the British liner Lusitania. Now, Lusitania, off the southern coast of Ireland, of the 1,198 persons lost, 128 of them were, guess what? American. The Germans defended their actions on the grounds that the liner carried ammunition. Despite Germany's explanation, Americans became outraged with Germany because of the loss of life. American public opinion turned against Germany and the Central Powers. Despite the provocation, President Wilson ruled out a military response in favor of a sharp protest to Germany. 3 months later, on August 19th, a U-boat sank another British liner, this time the Arabic, drowning 2 Americans. Again, the United States protested, and this time Germany agreed not to sink any more passenger ships. But in March 1916, Germany broke its promise and torpedoed an unarmed French passenger steamer, the Sussex. The Sussex sank. About 80 passengers, including Americans, were killed or injured. Once again, the United States warned that it would break off diplomatic relations unless Germany changed its tactics. Again, Germany agreed, but there was a condition. If the United States could not persuade Britain to lift its blockade against food and fertilizer, Germany would consider renewing unrestricted submarine warfare. Key term there, unrestricted submarine warfare. Okay? 1916 come around. In the U.S. presidential election, the Democrats renominated Wilson, and he is going to remain president when he wins the election of 1916. If you recall, 4 years earlier, he won the election in 1912 when Teddy Roosevelt ran against William Howard Taft, and they split the Republican vote, and Wilson became our president. Well, now it's 1916. He's won the re-election again. Now the United States is going to declare war. The question is, what is going to make the United States declare war in World War I? Now, they're going to provoke the United States once again. The Germans ignored Wilson's call for peace. Germany's leaders hoped that to defeat Britain by resuming unrestricted submarine warfare. On January 31st, the Kaiser announced that U-boats would sink all ships in British waters, hostile or neutral, on sight. So basically, the German submarines are now going to be shooting on sight. If they see a British liner, a British ship, no question asked, just going to torpedo it and shoot it down. Wilson was stunned. The German decision meant that the United States would have to go to war. However, the president held back, saying that he would wait for actual overt acts before declaring war. All right. Then here comes the Zimmerman note. You should have read about this in the packet I gave to you on Monday, or left for you on Monday. The Zimmerman note. This was a telegram from the German foreign minister to the German ambassador of Mexico. Now we're on page 585. And the telegram proposed an alliance between Mexico and Germany and promised that if war with the United States broke out, Germany would support Mexico in recovering its lost territory in Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Next came the sinking of 4 unarmed American merchant ships with a loss of 36 lives. So we got all these ships being sunk by the Germans. We're losing American lives. But then comes the Zimmerman note, which threatened to support Mexico in taking back their land, a portion of that they lost to the United States in the Mexican-American War. We talked about that. And we did a mini-Q over the Mexican-American War. We're asking the question, was that war justified? The mini-Q asked that question because many people believe that a lot of that land was stolen from Mexico by the United States through the Manifest Destiny. And well, now here's Germany saying, you know what, we can help you get that land back that you just lost to the United States. So with that Zimmerman note, it was intercepted by the British, so it never reached Mexico. And once the British intercepted the message, they gave it to us. And we were like, okay, now it's time to go to war. And we did. All right, so let's go ahead and get to what page we want to go to here? 588. Okay, we are in war. Now it's time to raise an army. Now, this is something else you should have saw in your packet that you received on Monday. Time to raise an army. It was called the Selective Service Act. And with the Selective Service Act, it more or less says that boys, men, once they reach a certain age, must sign up with the government in case that we ever have a draft that they possibly could be drafted. Now, we talked about this another term. We talked about this during the Civil War. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln and the Confederate Army used something called conscription, which basically means a military draft. And, well, now with the Selective Service Act, you have to sign up once you reach a certain age. I signed up for it when I turned 18 in high school. If I did not sign up for it, from my understanding, I would not have been able to receive financial aid for college. So if you don't sign up for Selective Service Act, you won't be get some federal funding, such as college aid or maybe whatever you can receive from the federal government. Any benefits, Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. If you're a male and you don't sign up for Selective Service, my understanding is you won't be able to receive those things. So, on page 588, make sure you look up Selective Service Act. To meet the government's need for more fighting power, Congress passed the Selective Service Act in May 1917. The act required men to register with the government in order to be randomly selected for military service. By the end of 1918, 24 million men had registered under the act. Of this number, almost 3 million were called up. About 2 million troops reached Europe before the truce was signed, and 3/4 of them saw actual combat. Most of the inductees had not attended high school. So the first people usually get drafted, those who are not going to college or your high school dropouts. And 1 in 5 were foreign born. About 400,000 African Americans served in the armed forces. More than half of them served in France. African American soldiers served in segregated units and were excluded from the Navy and the Marines. Most African Americans were assigned to non-combat duties, although there were exceptions. The all-black 369th Infantry Regiment saw more continuous duty on the front lines than any other American regiment. 2 soldiers of the 369th, Henry Johnson and Needham Roberts, were the first African Americans to receive France's highest military honor, the Cross of War. So as you see, once again, African Americans have their fingerprint on a lot of American history, especially when it goes back to war and fighting for this country. We saw this during the American Revolution, where one of the first men who died at the Boston Massacre was a man of African and Native American descent. In the comments below, if you recall who that man was that died in the American Revolution at the Boston Massacre first, if you recall what his name was, put in the comment, extra credit. All right, so moving on from the Selective Service Act, We're going to move on over to page 598. On 598, you got the Espionage and Sedition Act. And it's very much what it is. One thing I've been trying to drill in your head is when we go to war in the United States of America, they take away certain rights. Abraham Lincoln did it when he suspended the writ of habeas corpus. And you're going to see it again now with the World War I, with the Espionage and Sedition Acts. Now, if you look on page 598, in June 1917, Congress passed the Espionage Act, and in May of 1918, it passed the Sedition Act. Under the Espionage and Sedition Act, a person could be fined up to $10,000 or sentenced to 20 years in jail for interfering with the war effort or for saying anything disloyal, profane, or abusive about the government or the war effort. Now, with the Espionage and Sedition Act, pretty much tells me that they didn't want American citizens speaking out against the war, basically taking away your First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech. Like I said, you saw this with Lincoln when he suspended the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War. You're seeing it now, and you will see it again throughout American history. Most recently, the Patriot Act, which was signed during the war in Iraq, where many American rights were taken away from American citizens because we were at war. So make sure you understand that when this country goes to war, they take away certain rights that you are given by our Constitution, the Bill of Rights. Right? And the Espionage and Sedition Act was no different. All right, so it says here, like the Alien and Sedition Act of 1798, these laws clearly violated the spirit of the First Amendment. Their passage led to over 2,000 prosecutions for loosely defined anti-war activities. Of these, over half resulted in convictions. Newspapers and magazines that opposed the war or criticized any of the Allies lost their mailing privilege, which is, once again, the First Amendment. The House of Representatives refused to seat Victor Berger, a socialist congressman from Wisconsin, because of his anti-war views. Columbia University fired a distinguished psychologist because he opposed the war. A colleague who supported the war thereupon resigned in protest, saying if we have to suppress everything we don't like to hear, this country is resting on a pretty wobbly basis. You hear a lot about it today where you hear from more of the conservative part of the country who say that many colleges do not like to hear the conservative view or the Republican view of politics in America. So that once again, you have the issue of First Amendment being questioned. And it was no different in the Espionage and Sedition Act. All right. So now, let's keep on moving. And war encourages a social change. This is more or less dealing with African Americans in the country in the early 1900s during World War I. Now, World War I lasted from 1914 to 1919. But the United States did not get involved until 1917. So we came in at the tail end of the war. And with that, talk about that a little bit later. But let's go ahead and get into the war encourages social change. African Americans and the war. Now, black public opinion about the war was divided. On one side were people like W.E.B. Du Bois, who believed that blacks should support the war effort. Du Bois believed that African American support for the war would strengthen calls for racial justice. In contrast, William Monroe Trotter, founder of the Boston Guardian, believed that victims of racism should not support a racist government. Trotter condemned Du Bois' accommodationist approach and favored protests instead. Nevertheless, despite grievances over continued racial inequality in the United States, most African Americans backed the war. At the end of the day, African Americans still saw the United States as their home. This is their country. Regardless of how they were being treated, this is the only home that they know. And at the end of the day, if this home goes to war with somebody else, we're going to defend our home. And that's what that probably was the view of many African Americans during World War I. And World War II was too. World War II was no different when it came to racial inequality for African Americans. So at the end of the day, African Americans supported both wars because of that. Now, moving on from there, something called the Great Migration. This is on page 599. Something else you need to make sure you know is the Great Migration. And the Great Migration dealt with black people. And the issues that black people dealt with in the South. Racial intimidation, discrimination, terrorism, So, in the day, let's understand that those things were going on in the South, and black people did not want to deal with that in a system that was oppressing them, in a system that was built to defeat them. So, what did a lot of African Americans in the South do? They left, and they went where? North. So, on page 599, the Great Migration. In concrete terms, the greatest effect of the First World War on African American lives was that it accelerated the Great Migration, the large scale movement of hundreds of thousands of Southern blacks to cities in the North. This great population shift had already begun before the war in the late 19th century, when African Americans trickled northward to escape the Jim Crow South. We talk about Jim Crow, a term you should know by now. Basically made it legal to segregate the races. But after the turn of the century, the trickle became a tidal wave. Several factors contributed to the tremendous increase in black migration. First, many African Americans sought to escape racial discrimination in the South, which made it hard to make a living and often threatened their lives. Also, a boll weevil infestation. And the boll weevil, they ate the cotton. These little bugs like beetles. And ate the cotton. They ate the cotton, and the cotton picked. If you was a sharecropper, like I told you, my mother and my grandparents were sharecroppers up in Northeast Georgia. If you had no cotton to pick, you had no way of making money. Okay, so the boll weevil infestation was very big as well. You had floods and droughts ruined much of the South cotton fields. In the North, there were more job opportunities. For example, Henry Ford, the Ford Company, your Ford Mustang, your Ford Expedition, Henry Ford opened his automobile assembly line to black workers in 1914. So if you live in the South, doing all the racism, the discrimination, and the oppression, the terrorism that you get to deal with through lynching, and you have the North, was to many African Americans was a land of milk and honey, and you got Henry Ford sitting here offering you a job where you have no longer working in that cotton field and work for the sharecropper. Why not go to Detroit and work in a Henry Ford plant, making money, making decent money, good money? Okay, so the outbreak of World War I and the drop in European immigration increased job opportunities for African Americans in steel mills, munition plants, and stockyards. Okay, hold on one second. There we go. Northern manufacturers sent recruiting agents to distribute free railroad passes through the South. In addition, the publishers of the black-owned newspaper Chicago Defender bombarded Southern blacks with articles contrasting Dixieland lynchings with the prosperity of African Americans in the North. And we talked about that, terrorism versus possible the land of milk and honey. If you was a black person, you was young, and you had the ability to move, you would. Okay, and many of them went north to cities like Chicago, New York, St. Louis, Detroit, Harlem. All right, so many African Americans got out of that and went to the North. However, racial prejudice against African Americans also existed in the North. The press of new migration to northern cities caused overcrowding and intensified racial tension. Nevertheless, between 1910 and 1930, hundreds of thousands of African Americans migrated to such cities as Chicago, New York, and Philadelphia. And we already talked about Detroit, where Henry Ford plant was. It is also. So, all right. So make sure you understand the Great Migration. Now, in my last 5 to 6 years teaching and paying attention to politics, there has been another Great Migration for African Americans. They're leaving the North and moving back to the South. One reason is this: today, to solve the racial discrimination or oppression and terrorism does not exist like it did in the early 1900s to up to the mid 60s, 1960s. So that president is no longer here. You have job opportunities in the South. The cost of living is cheaper in the South. The weather is better in the South. Why have to walk through snow that's 3 feet tall when you don't have to? So a lot of African Americans are moving out of the North and moving back to the South. And one of the major cities that they're moving to is Atlanta. Okay, some of you might have family members who moved from the North down to the South. Some of you might be those people who moved from the North to the South for one of those reasons, if not another. But we are having another great migration, and who knows if where this will lead this country in the future. But we're having another great migration of African Americans leaving the North, coming back to the South right now. So moving on from the Great Migration, let's go ahead and go over to page 604. Wilson's Fight for Peace. Okay. Now we're about to sum up chapter 19, be done with it real quick. So now Wilson's Fight for Peace. Right here we see him. President Wilson is the president. He is beloved in Europe. Many Europeans saw him as the great savior who came in at the end of the war and ended this war that took millions of lives during World War I. You had issues of people, you had chemical weapons being used, killing millions of people. You had new technologies such as airplanes and tanks and machine guns. These were new technologies that the world was not ready for in the effort in which we still fought wars. Millions of lives, machine guns, tanks, airplanes, gas. World War I brought in new technology that the world was not quite ready for to use in a war. And when the United States came in and shut down World War I and pretty much won World War I, even though we came in at the tail end, many Europeans saw Woodrow Wilson as the great savior. And I think that's when many other nations around the world began to see the United States as a world power. We were becoming a world power at the end of World War I. So now, when you keep look at Wilson here, Wilson fights for peace. Pretty much, I think Wilson had the best plan. Wilson's plan was to prevent something like World War I from happening again. But as you see, we had World War II. Something went awry. Something went wrong. One of the main reasons was Wilson's 14-point plan, as you can see on page 605. His 14-point plan was not all implemented because Britain and France did not want to implement all his 14 points. Okay? Now, rejection was the last thing that Wilson expected when he arrived in Europe. Everywhere he went, people gave him a hero's welcome. Italians displayed his picture in their windows. Parisians screwed the streets with flowers. Representatives of one group after another, including Armenians, Jews, Ukrainians, and Poles, appealed to him for help in setting up independent nations for themselves. So, Wilson saw himself by the people in Europe as a hero. But Britain and France was not ready to welcome him or they were not ready to accept everything he brought to the table. So he had this 14-point plan. Even before the war was over, Wilson presented his plan for world peace. On January 18, 1918, he delivered his now famous 14-point speech before Congress. The points were divided into 3 groups. The first 5 points were issues that Wilson believed had to be addressed to prevent another war. 1. There should be no secret treaties among nations. As you recall, one of the main causes of World War I was the alliance system. So he said, you know what? No more of that. No reason, no need for secret treaties. 2. Freedom of the seas should be maintained at all times. Now that's referring to the British blockade that killed over 750,000 Germans when they starved them to death. And also referring to the unrestricted submarine warfare that the Germans were pretty much using on everyone. So he wanted freedom of the seas. Point 3, tariffs and other economic barriers among nations should be lowered or abolished in order to foster free trade. Now, we all talk, this is another term that you should know from my class, is a tariff. And a tariff is a tax on goods coming into your country. Okay? Now, he said that we should lower tariff or abolish them to foster free trade. Point 4, arms should be reduced to the lowest point consistent with domestic, know that term, domestic safety, thus lessening the possibility of military response during diplomatic crises. Now, number 4 is referring to another cause of World War I, militarism. He said, you know what? No reason to build up your military and use it as a diplomatic tool. Now, when I say a diplomatic tool, it means if you have issues with another country, you should not sit down at the table to discuss these issues at the same time have your military standing right behind you. Don't use your military as a diplomatic tool. Lower your military and make sure that you only have it enough for domestic safety, more or less for policing your own country. Point five, colonial policies should consider the interests of the colonial people as well as the interests of the imperialist power. This goes to another one of the causes of World War I, imperialism. We talked about imperialism before spring break. Imperialism is when a stronger nation takes over a weaker territory by means of political, economic, or military means. And basically what he's saying is, if you're going to be an imperialist power, consider the people that you are going to be, he uses his word, but conquering. So, for example, the United States, when the United States used imperialism to take over Hawaii, the United States should make sure they consider the people of Hawaii, that which they now have colonized. We use either word, colonize, conquer, they're both the same thing. Okay? Now, France and Britain did not care about those first five. Then they, I'm telling you, those first five, if those first 5 points would have been implemented, we might have been able to prevent World War II. But Britain and France didn't want nothing to do with it. The next 8 points dealt with boundary changes. Wilson based these provisions on the principle of self-determination along historical established lines of nationality. In other words, groups that claim distant ethnic identities were to form their own nation states or decide for themselves to what nations they would belong. The 14th point is the only point that Britain and France agreed to. The 14th point called for the creation of an international organization to address diplomatic crises like those that had sparked the war. The League of Nations would provide a forum for nations to discuss and settle their grievances without to resort to war. The League of Nations is the only one of the 14 points that Wilson came up with that France and Britain agreed to. League of Nations. Britain and France's main objective was to punish Germany. They wanted to punish Germany. They believed that Germany was the cause of the war. Germany is the reason why all these lives were lost. So you know what? We're going to punish them. They didn't really care too much to think about how to prevent this from happening again. They wanted to punish Germany. Britain and France did. So, once again, the war is over. So when the war is over, what do people do? They sit down and sign a treaty. This is going to be the Treaty of Versailles. You should be on page 606. You should have saw this in your packet as well. The Treaty of Versailles established 9 new nations, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the kingdom that later became Yugoslavia, and shifted the boundaries of other nations. It carved 5 areas out of the Ottoman Empire and gave them to France and Great Britain as mandates or temporary colonies. Those 2 allies were to administer their respective mandates until the areas were ready for self-rule and then independence. The treaty barred Germany from maintaining an army, so Germany can't have an army. It also required Germany to return the regions of Lorraine to France and to pay reparations or war damages amounting $33 billion. So you heard me correct. Germany was to pay $33 billion in reparations for the war. And in the final part of the Treaty of Versailles, said that Germany had to sign pretty much a war guilt clause. And the war guilt clause pretty much said that Germany had to take blame for the entire war. And we all know Germany wasn't the only one fighting this war. It wasn't the only one to get started. Now, I guess you ask yourself, what happened to Russia? Where's Russia at? Well, Russia, they had their own little civil war going on. It's called the Bolshevik Revolution. And you had these communist revolutionaries known as the Bolsheviks. They were led by a man by the name of Vladimir Lenin. And Vladimir Lenin, he wanted to overthrow the Russian monarchy. They were known as the Romanov dynasty, the king and queen. They had children. The Bolsheviks wanted to overthrow the Romanov after they got involved in World War I. Many Russians didn't want to be involved in World War I. The Romanov family, the Romanov dynasty, the monarchy got them involved. A lot of people were upset. A lot of people wanted in Russia wanted to get rid of the monarchy. And the Bolshevik Revolution, basically revolutionary communists led by Vladimir Lenin, overthrew the Romanov family. And when they overthrew the Romanov family, they killed off the entire family. They killed the king, the queen, and their children. Now later, many people found the remains of everybody's body, except for one of the Romanov's children, a daughter. Her name was Anastasia. Nobody has never found her body. If you know, there's a Disney movie called, I believe the Disney movie is called Anastasia. And it is loosely based off of what happened to the Romanov family during the Bolshevik Revolution, during the Russian Civil War. But when the Russians pulled out of World War I, the United States jumped in. And the United States filled the void that was left by Russia during World War I. So you had the Zimmerman Note, you had the sinking of the Lusitania and other ships by Germany, and then you had the Russians pulling out of World War I. All three of those things were pretty much led up to the United States getting involved in World War I. When the Russians pulled out because of their civil war, we felt the void. We felt like we need to step in. Of course, Germany did everything they could to provoke us. So that pretty much was that. Now, let's see here. Anything else I need to speak on in chapter 19? That's it. All right. So right now I put up on Edmodo this video. I also put up your. Okay. Give me 1 second. Almost done. I also put up your agenda for the time I'm gonna be out. Make sure you get these packages done. I'm gonna take up the work once I come back. So I'll come back on Wednesday, a week from today. You need to make sure you have all my work completed. I will be taking it up. Now today, if I'm not mistaken, you should have received a book assignment as well as finishing up the 2 packages you received on Monday and Tuesday. And you're going to have more work to do coming back tomorrow and Friday and Monday and Tuesday next week. Milestone is on April 24th. Make sure you're studying. Sorry I can't have my milestone tutorial. Sorry about that. But signing off. 1, 2, 3.